join an angel group. It's like a fraternity for adults. If you're Sam Altman and you throw 10 million at it and like, oops, it didn't work out, I don't care. She spent a couple of years saving up 50K. 3 months later, she has nothing. 50K gone. I'm not joking. Like, it almost brought me to tears. There's going to be a lot more garbage. It's going to be shiny garbage, but it's going to be garbage. They're not the cheapest, but for the price, they are the best. And you'll have to fight me if you disagree with me.
Welcome to the Diligent Observer from PitchFact. I'm your host, Andrew, and every week I share insights and strategies to help angel investors make better bets. My guest today is Igor Belagorudsky, a serial entrepreneur and startup expert who has been involved in over 20 startups over the past 30 years. Igor is the founder of FastCTO, a company that provides affordable CTO and development services to early-stage startups. He's also an active angel investor and advisor. In this episode, we dive into Igor's mission to redeem the staffing industry, discuss the challenges faced by bootstrap founders, and explore his unique approach to helping startups avoid costly mistakes in the earliest stages. We also touch on the evolving landscape of startup technology and the impact of AI on entrepreneurship. I hope you enjoy learning from Igor as much as I did. Igor, thanks for joining me today.
Nice being here.
I am very excited to chat, Igor, for a variety of reasons, but one of those is that the service that you all provide in the company that you're running today feels very different from most of the companies that I'm interacting with in Silicon Valley and in the startup ecosystem. You guys are very focused on giving back, not looking to make a huge profit. And I think the story behind that is really fascinating. Something you said to me in one of our previous conversations, Igor, is that you're setting out to redeem the staffing space. I wonder if you could unpack that for me. Why is it something that you're passionate about, and what's the story behind that?
I don't think the staffing space is redeemable. It's to redeem my impact on it, per se. So basically, I came to this country when I was 10. I had my first startup at 12, fell in love with startups. I've had a bunch of them at this point. The last 30 years, been spending on startups.
How many? How many would you say?
Oh boy, it depends on your definition. On my definition, 20-ish. Most of them failed. Some failed post-launch, some failed pre-launch. Some we didn't launch specifically because it would have been a disaster. But I've had some successes. My last exit was about 7 years ago. It was a staffing software company. So think like a Salesforce for recruiters type of thing. It's called an ATS. We raised about $30 million. We sold it for about $62 million. It was an 8-year journey. And basically coming out of that, I felt really icky about staffing as an industry and kind of enabling staffing through this. So the last 6-7 years of my life has been a way for me to redeem myself from enabling the ickiness. The way I define staffing, by the way, is kind of the standard definition where you pay someone one thing and you bill them out for much more than that. So imagine any agency like your big four, your like Deloitte, McKinsey, Accenture, et cetera, any dev shop, regardless of what country they're in, any law firm, right? They all work on the model of you pay someone X and their bill rate is 2 to 3X of what you pay for them. It is what it is, right? I can't change the world, or maybe not with this attitude, but I can't change the world, but I can at least make it better for the people I can reach. And the folks that I can reach are early stage startups. But that's basically what I mean by redeeming myself.
So say more about the ick that you felt after working in that space. What's so icky about it?
What's icky about it is that not everyone comes from the same financial situation, right? So if you're a series B, C, D, if you're Sam Altman with OpenAI and you have an idea and you throw 10 million at it and like, oops, it didn't work out, I don't care. You could throw away 10 million. It's like a line item in your budget. It doesn't matter. But if you're a bootstrapped founder that you saved up 50K, 100K, whatever it is, because you had this incredible idea And then the first thing you do is you toss it over the fence to some dev shop. And then 2 months later, you have nothing to show for it and you're out 50K. That's a much different situation, even though the net amount of money is much smaller, right? I live in Boston now. Boston, you can call it an affluent town, right? For a lot of the founders here, if you have an idea and you throw away 50K in it, it sucks, but life goes on in a very kind of real sense. Like you buy a bottle of whiskey and you're like, oh, well, you know, it's okay. But that's not everyone, not by a long shot. There's people out there that are really smart, well educated, but better educated in a lot of cases than the people that have the financial freedom to throw away 50K, but they don't come from that place. They save up money. They ask around. They get introduced to these dev shops on a recommendation from someone they trust, and then they lose 50K. That could be life altering in a very real way, right? So that's what I'm trying to prevent, if that makes sense. What's important to note here is that the people on the ends of the spectrum, on one end, you have the founder that has the idea. On the other end, you have a developer somewhere in the world, from, it could be in US, it could be in Canada, it could be in Bangladesh or whatever. The developer wants to do a good job. Most developers are not scam artists. There are people out there that do that, but most developers want to do a good job. And it's not necessarily the developer's fault even that the only access to a job they have wherever it is that they live is through these dev shops. But the dev shops have a 70% margin. So you talk about some like Philippines or India or something, they're paying these developers, today is what, October 7th, 2024. They're paying these developers $12 an hour, 13, maybe $15 an hour. They're billing them out for 75, right? That's a hefty margin. And so what happens then is the very best case scenario, 75 to 12, that might be a little bit of a hyperbole, but it does happen. The average margin is 50 to 70%. Sometimes a smidge lower, oftentimes a lot higher. Like I've hired people off of TopTal, which is like, we hired number 1% developers, whatever. They were paying this poor guy $40 an hour, billing him out at 140, right? So more than 3x. So the very best case scenario is you engage one of these dev shops and you actually get back for your money what you expected. But that means that you've wasted 70% of your budget because they have a 70% margin. So if you had, for round numbers, 100K, you spent 100K and you are happy with the result, that result's worth 30K, right? That's the best case scenario. But that best case scenario is like 5% of the results. 95% is you throw away 100K. I want to make sure people don't throw away 100K, especially if they don't have it. But especially if they do, it doesn't matter. I just want them to throw away 100K.
So say more about how you came to develop this belief, this passion. Like you're clearly fired up about this and you built a company around it, which I want to hear more about. But like, how did this come about?
Yeah, so it's this feeling that I've had for a while. Every startup that I've ever started, I was either the technical co-founder or the first lead engineer or a solo founder or something like that. But I have the benefit of being able to make the things I think about, right? But most startups don't have the benefit of someone like me. Talk to any non-technical co-founder and ask them how their technical co-founder search is going. It's tough out there. AI and all that is making it a little bit easier, but it's tough out there. And so basically, I talked to all these startups that follow the typical path of finding a dev shop. And there are some dev shops that on the surface are very shiny. They're like, come this way. We're gonna sit with you. We're gonna figure out your product strategy, your go-to-market strategy. We'll make you a mood board with pretty colors and pictures of mountains and birds. And if this is your first go-around, especially, all that feels like forward progress, when in reality it's smoke and mirrors. You know what I mean? So it's tricky. And then The real catalyst for me, there is an organization, or I guess an organization within an organization. There's an organization that started in Boston called CIC, which used to stand for Cambridge Innovation Center, but now I think it's just CIC. And they run this thing called Venture Cafe, which is incredible. If you're ever in the Boston area on a Thursday, you should check it out. It's in Kendall Square. But it's literally just a entrepreneurial hangout. Come from 5 to 7, have some free beers, chat with other people in the startup community. Boston has an incredible startup community. And so I used to go pretty often because worst case, I get 3 beers. Best case, I meet someone interesting, right? So, well, 3 is the max. That's why I said 3 beers. They see you laughing. And they're like small cups. But anyway, so I used to go and talk to random people, and I've made some very interesting connections. One of them actually will come back to because it kind of started me on this angel investing journey. But I remember back in about 2018, like the tail end of 2018, I was at a venture cafe and I was talking to this woman, and she was telling me the same story that I keep hearing, except with a little twist. She was a single mom. She had this idea. It had to do with like for single moms. I actually, it's so long ago, I don't even remember the specifics of the idea, but I remember thinking like, there's a market here. There's a really good idea, right? But she talked to some friend and she asked, how much do I need to implement it? And that friend gave her 50K should do it. So she spent a couple of years saving up 50K. And then she talked to another friend and she said, okay, like I've got the 50K. Who's going to make it for me? And that friend introduced him to a dev shop. And then dev shop, very pretty, mood board, et cetera, et cetera. And then 3 months later, she has nothing. 50K gone and nothing to show for it. And for her, like that idea is dead in the water because like she can't raise, she has no traction, no nothing. She has no prior exits. She's not like Adam Newman, right? Like she can't like that's it. That's it. And so I'm not joking. Like it almost brought me to tears. And that's really when FastCTO was born. I'm like, I can't help everyone, but I can help people like this if they come to me before they throw out 50K. And so that's what we've been doing for the last, it'll be 6 years in January. So we work with mostly early stage startups, about 70% early stage and 30% everyone else.
So say more about that. What do you do now that's different? How do you break that mold?
The hypothesis is this. There are people out there that for almost every type of startup have built something similar already. Maybe once or twice or 3 times. Maybe they've gone through due diligence. They kind of know the domain, the industry, the stack. And the problem is those people are really expensive later stage career CTOs that these startups don't have access to. Like maybe they'll get them in an office hour in like a venture cafe or something like that, but not on any consistent basis. They can't afford them. Even if they could afford them, it's overkill. Most startups I talk to, even if I was to work for free, I would be sitting on my hands 37 hours a week, right? Like they just don't need me, right? And so the problem is when you can't hire someone like that full time, the places they live are those big consulting firms like your Accenture, Deloitte, BCG, McKinsey's. And those places are just dev shops by another name with a 70% margin. So they'll pay their CTOs like 200, 250 an hour, let's say, and they'll bill them out for 700, 750. Where those people are great, they're very smart, but 750 an hour to a bootstrap CTO that has 50K all in is a non-starter, right? So the hypothesis was, what if I can get these kinds of people, these kinds of CTOs to help startups in an accessible way? Not necessarily free, but accessible. So I basically had a couple of friends that worked at those kinds of places, and I went to them and I said, listen, let me pay you the same thing that the big guys are paying you, but then instead of tripling it as your bill rate, I'm going to transparently add just a couple of dollars just to pay for Slack and things, and just redirect you to work with startups. Like, how much of someone like you would it take to move this startup in the right direction? And so those friends basically said, okay, let's try it. And it was magic. Basically, if you take a CTO and you tell that CTO, pretend this was your company, pretend this was your money. What would you do? And then additionally, bill as little as you can in terms of time, get these founders moving. It takes no time at all, like 2 to 3 hours a week. But the problem is you can't do what I'm doing if you want to make money. Because if you want to make money, the tendency and the urge is to increase the gap between pay rate and bill rate. So basically, we structured the whole thing like a nonprofit. So our margins are transparent and they're about 10%, usually 8 to 12, sometimes lower, sometimes a little higher for the companies that can afford a little higher. And we tell them that we're going to charge them a little more, but that helps us work with startups. And they're usually very happy about that because rising tide lifts all ships sort of thing. And at this point, again, it'll be 6 years in January. We have about 250 CTOs, most of them in US, but some in Europe. We have about 80 engineers. I'm Ukrainian. For anybody that's watching this, I got a Ukrainian flag behind me. But I'm Ukrainian, and so I passionately feel that Ukraine is like, before the war and even still now, the best bang for the buck in the world in terms of talent for your money. They're not the cheapest, but for the price, they are the best. And you'll have to fight me if you disagree with me. But anyways, so we got about 80 engineers. They're in Ukraine or the surrounding areas because of the war. But we run the whole thing like a nonprofit. So basically the way that it works is we have as low of a margin as we can across the board on CTOs and developers, around 10% versus the 50 to 70% of a typical dev shop. It helps us cover operating costs. Our burn is super low. So even with that low margin, we have plenty left over. And anything that we have left over, we put into an angel fund that we have on the back end. And then we write small checks throughout the year and invest in companies to offset, like, oops, we made too much money. But they're not big checks. We're not leading any rounds, but they're like $20,000, $30,000 checks, 5 to 6 to 7, sometimes depending on the year, times a year. And usually not in our clients because that creates like a murky relationship. But we just look at our angel fund account and we say, oh, we got $30,000. Like, let's see who's raising around right now. And we work with a lot of accelerators and everything like that. We basically knock on Techstars' door and we say, like, anybody promising? And do that. And then we reset every year with about 50K in the bank as a cushion and start over. And we work with hundreds of startups all over the world and a bunch of universities and a bunch of accelerators and VCs and private equity folks. And that's what we do on the startup side of things. And then about 30% of what we do is everybody else, like Series B, C, D, unicorn type companies, where we do due diligences and all sorts of that kind of stuff, where we actually tell them, like, hey, if you need a developer and you were a startup, let's say we pay this developer $40 an hour, they'd be 85, 90 at a dev shop. They'll be 45 to a startup through us. If we base on the 40, like, we need a little bit just to cover the costs. But then if we're working with like a private equity firm and they're like, oh, we need some developers, we say, okay, well, you're going to be paying $65 an hour, which is less than their market rate through a dev shop, but it's more than if you were a startup, but just know that your money is going in the right direction. They're like, oh, this is a great idea. Better than TopTal. So it's a win-win all around.
How many companies have you guys worked with over the last 12 months?
Probably close to 500, maybe more. There is a number that is our clients, like people that we work with, we sign a contract with, and we like officially help out. But I talk to probably 10 to 15 founders a week, like net new founders a week. And I turn away probably half of them every week. And I don't turn them away and say, like, no, I don't want to work with you because for whatever reason. I tell them, don't spend money with me or anyone. Like, here's why this idea isn't ready to be spent money on. Here's what you should do. And then in like a month or so, come back. And if you could convince me to give you someone you should pay for, okay. But that's like the big difference with us, where if you come to me and you say, okay, Igor, I want to hire 3 developers. If I was a dev shop, I'd ring the bell and give you, here's 3 developers at 70% margin. But what we do is we don't let you hire a developer unless you could prove to me you need a developer, right? So in that sense, we helped a lot more companies because there's so many founders that if their first knock on the door was a dev shop, they'd be convinced to spend 50K, 100K, whatever it is.
Yep.
But they were lucky to call us first, and we're like, whoa, full stop, don't do it.
So I want to unpack that, Igor. I wonder if you could highlight, maybe to start, what are the indications of an entrepreneur that's all green flags? Like, these are the reasons, these are the times to start engaging a dev shop. What are those indicators that make you go, yeah, we can help you guys. Let's continue conversations and get you plugged in? What does that look like?
Yeah, so I'm going to go a little bit against common thought on this, because for a lot of angels, it's second time, third time founder. Like, the more times they've been through this, the better chance they have of raising money. Where for me, I'm more of a past performance doesn't indicate future returns type of thing. I've had a number of startups, and it's not like every next one had a greater chance of success. It's up and down and up and down and up and down, because sometimes your ideas are good and sometimes they're not good. And startups are a number game. Same thing as angel investing, right? I've invested in some incredible founders that on paper were all green flags with an idea that I thought was great. Like, one of my first angel investments was, I legitimately thought was an amazing idea. And the founder was so charismatic and put together. And again, not a first time founder. I was like, here's 50K. Like, oh, no due diligence. Like, you sold me here. Like, go use this well. And that was not good. Because it turns out, well, COVID kind of killed it as well. COVID killed a lot of startups, and it was a social kind of startup. So basically, for me, the green flags are that I think the idea is good, and that if I were in their position, given the time and the money they've spent up to now, I would have been in the same or worse spot. So if they've done with what they had as well or better than what I think I would have done, then that's the only green flag I need. I've invested in domains that I don't know anything about, but I have a hard time. And when I do that, then it's just a coin toss. And then you go off of other people's due diligence, which, if you're in an angel group or you're like in the syndicate sort of thing, is super helpful. Like, that's why individual angels join angel groups, not like sometimes for the camaraderie, sometimes for networking or whatever. But for me, it was for, hey, someone should double check my due diligence because I don't know anything about this domain. So for example, I invested a couple of years ago. This would have been pre-COVID. So like 2019-ish, 2018, 2019. I invested in this one company that did post-op eye gel. So basically, there's this operation that happens about 300,000 to 500,000 times a year in US, where post-op, you need to like lay down either on your stomach or on your back for like a week or something. You can't go to work, nothing like that. But with this gel, you can go back to work the next day. So founders out of like MGH, which is one of the most reputable hospitals in the world, again, on paper, super duper great. They passed due diligence, not mine. I had nothing to do with it. I'm not a doctor, but people that I trust to know what they're doing said, okay. And so I invested alongside them, and it's been a rough 5 or 6 years. They're still alive, but it's like what Mark Cuban calls dumb money. My money is the definition of dumb money, and I hate being dumb money because there's nothing I can do to help. There's no advice I can give. There's nothing. It's just like, here's 30K. Do something with it. So I don't like doing that.
So it sounds like your angel investment decision-making framework is comparable to the framework you use when assessing whether or not it makes sense for an entrepreneur to work with you guys and invest some of their money in bringing on a CTO. Is that true?
To a certain extent, except that I have a healthy sized ego, but at the same time, I know that I don't know everything. So there are domains that I don't have any context with. So I'll give you an example. A couple of weeks ago, I had a founder that was referred to us by one of our CTOs, and she had an idea for a book sharing app with like a twist. And she was very convinced that there is an enormous community of people on TikTok and Instagram that are like the book people of TikTok that would all love this. And she's like, if this was in the market, they would all use it and love it. And I basically said, okay, like, look, I don't know this domain. And she's a first time founder. She doesn't know terms like TAM and all that kind of stuff. I'm like, I have no idea. But she was gung ho. She's like, I want someone to take my money and build it. And I basically told her, I want you to go and ask some people, not people that are your family or your friends, make a post on TikTok and ask people like, hey, if this existed, would you use it? Would you pay for it? What would you want out of the service? And she came back to me a week or two later and she's like, look, good point. I made a TikTok and I got a lot of likes, but no real comments. So a little bit more trepidation. And I basically said, okay, good. That doesn't mean that your idea is bad, but you need to validate it before I feel comfortable having you pay me to help you with it. There are other people that would feel comfortable 2 weeks ago to take your money, but I don't. Traction is a big spectrum, right? Like if you had done with what you had, what I might have done, that's traction in a way, but that's not traction that an investor would consider traction. And especially there's East Coast investors and West Coast investors. West Coast investors, the stereotype is here's a mound of cash, go spend it and it doesn't matter. There are definitions of traction. Again, stereotypically, I don't want hate mail from West Coast VCs, but the stereotype is they're looking for a lot less evidence before they invest. Whereas East Coast VCs and angels are stingier is not the right word, but stingier. Like they're a lot more careful. So the check sizes are smaller and the evidence needs to be larger. So for example, the eye gel thing aside, because with healthcare, you have no evidence until you spend millions of dollars on trials. So that's a little bit more of a faith thing. But for any sort of SaaS based thing or B2B or B2C, traction generally means users with whatever low churn is for that industry. And if they're paying you, that's even better. Like that's traction. Traction is users. There's no other way around it.
So, Igor, I want to get a little bit more tactical because every startup that pitches to an investor has some kind of tech stack. It might be as simple as a dumb, static, one-page website all the way to some fancy schmancy MVP that they've built out, much of which just might be smoke and mirrors. Most angels that I know aren't software developers. They're not technical. They come from a variety of backgrounds and might have a little bit of context, but they're probably not deep into that space. Let's say you were advising a new angel investor who's not technical and they want to know, how do I quickly assess the tech stack, the development strategy that this particular entrepreneur is bringing to the table? What are the 1 to 3 questions that you would suggest that they ask an entrepreneur in order to quickly get a sense for the strength of that company's development strategy?
Many years ago, 20, 25 years ago, your stack mattered a lot more than it does now. So 20, 25 years ago, some languages couldn't do things that other languages could. Now, most languages could do anything, but there's still some things that are easy in certain languages, right? Like Node makes certain things easy and certain things harder. Rust makes certain things easy and certain things harder. Ruby, Java, .NET, whatever. So the stack itself doesn't matter, but the question that non-technical investors need to be asking is, does this solve the pain point it aims to solve? Because the stack is, how does it solve it? But the stack aside question is, does it solve? It's the same thing like back to the eye gel thing. I'm not a doctor. I don't need to know what polymers you use because I wouldn't know the names of them anyway. What I need to know is evidence that the thing you're thinking about does the thing you're telling me that people would pay money for. So the founders that come my way that are looking for investment and they already have something. So I'm a super technical guy, but what language is this written in is the last question on my list. And it's just like it's almost like an over the beer question. I don't frankly care. I care that it does the thing that it needs to do. And then also from an investor standpoint is a little bit different on a CTO standpoint. So like taking my CTO hat off, putting on my investor hat, I don't care that much about the code quality as an investor. I care that the first thing that you're going to do with my money is not throw it away and rebuild it, because I wouldn't like that. I want to make sure that the thing that you have is good for another 12 to 24 months. You keep building on it, et cetera, but it's not like a complete duct tape and paper clips. But I don't care what language it's written in necessarily. Now, taking off my investor hat, putting on my CTO hat on, of course I care, right? I care about code quality. I care about security. I care that I'm not going to give you 100K and then tomorrow you're going to get hacked. I do care about all that. But as an investor, especially a non-technical investor, you almost can't care too much about that kind of stuff because you'll never invest in anything.
So if I see a company that's raising 500K, let's say, and they've got 200 of that allocated to development, what question should I ask to understand what that means?
That's actually a pretty good 40% is a good percentage. That's roughly what I want to see. If you're a technical company raising, let's say 500K, I want to see 200 go toward R&D, whatever R&D is in whatever it is you're building. Sometimes it's like development, sometimes it's some algorithm, sometimes it's a new drone piece, whatever it is, but it's 40%. But the questions I would ask are, who's doing your development, right? Because if you have, let's say you have a technical co-founder and now you want to hire a second developer, that's one thing. If you're working with a dev shop and you have 3 offshore developers and now you want to hire 2 more, and I know that 70% of my 200K are gone, I would advise something different. But I would advise that regardless of whether I'm investing or not, right? Like when I talk to a founder and I will ask them like, okay, like how did you get to where you are? And they'll usually say they use some dev shop, and I'll ask how much, just out of curiosity, like how much they paid for it. And then I'll ask them whether they, looking back, are happy with what they got for what they spent. And the answer I usually get is no. But even when I get yes, and I ask, okay, what's a dev shop? And I know that their margin is 60 to 70%. I'm like, well, hindsight is 2020, but just so you know, going forward, you could do better. But non-technical founders or non-technical advisors can't know that. But that's why, again, join an angel group. If you're a lone investor out there, look into a local angel group. Every state has one, every main city not what many, wherever you are, join one. And then usually it's like a fraternity for adults. They usually have some sort of an annual fee, which is a touch above nominal. It's usually like 1 to 3K a year. Don't join anything that's higher than that.
Igor, that's an amazing word. A fraternity for adults. That's going to be the title of my takeaway.
I mean, it really is that. Like they meet once a month. Like the one I used to belong to in Boston is called Beacon Angels. It's a great group. Struggled a little bit through COVID and everything. It's a little smaller than I think it should be. But yeah, we met once a month. Everybody got to chat. There was a summer party. And then you do diligences together and you choose what to invest in. And it's fun. There's a bunch, like in Boston, there's Launchpad and there's Walnut and there's TBD Angels and Thai Angels. And some of them are national and international angel group syndicates, whatever you call them, with local chapters. Like Thai Angels, they're all over the place. So see if you have a local chapter.
One other thing I'm curious about that I hear founders talk a lot about is the concept of tech debt. There's so much thinking and stress, it feels like, early on in a founder's journey about the right balance of quality and scalability and speed that accumulates this tech debt over time. Explain the concept of tech debt to me in the audience, because I don't really understand it, and how you and your CTOs think about that balancing act for a young company.
So tech debt Imagine you're building like one of those log cabins or Lincoln logs. And imagine that it's just a simple square tower. If one of those logs is not perfectly on correctly, and you just leave it like that and keep building up, it'll work for a few levels, but it's going to eventually fall over because of that log, right? It's going to start leaning more and more and more and more and more. And the more you built on top of that, the harder it's going to be to shift that log back into place. And the more of these not perfectly placed logs there are, the more tech debt you have. So the more you build on top of it, the shakier the whole thing is. That's like a good explanation of tech debt. So the interesting thing there is if you know that you're building 5 levels high and on level 4 you have a crooked log, is it worth fixing it? So tech debt is not an immediate fire. A good CTO or a technical co-founder or like a developer, they'll never leave just tech debt in a black hole. You want to keep a log of everything that you wrote or built that's less than great, but then you want to prioritize it. I use a tool called Jira, which is, it's one of these things you love or hate or both. But in any kind of team that I run, maybe 20% of all the tickets are like, let's fix this later. And it's just an acknowledgement of some debt that is non-critical, but should be reviewed every couple of months and be like, okay, well, listen, when we had 300 users, this wasn't a problem. But like, if this goes viral and we have 10,000 users tomorrow, this is going to become a real issue. So we should fix that before that happens. So that's tech debt.
So, Igor, I'm curious, what are some of the trends that you're really excited about in this space and in the ecosystem that you're following?
I'm not going to say AI because everybody is going to say AI, but it is a fun trend.
Dial it in. AI in what context? That could be more fun.
If you're going to force me to talk about AI, I will. Here's the thing. AI for the next 3 to 5 years, because who knows what's going to be in 10 years and Skynet and whatever. But in the next 3 to 5 years, AI is not going to replace developers or technical co-founders or CTOs or things like that. But it does every month, and every new release of Claude or ChatGPT or whatever that I see, it raises the waterline of what's accessible to I wouldn't say non-technical co-founder, but a less than very technical co-founder. Because you still need to know what you're doing. And things like Claude, they can spit out okay code, like on a scale of 1 to 10, the stuff that I see Claude or Cursor or whatever do is a solid 5.5, right? It's not great, but it's not terrible, but it's not great. And it's rarely exactly what you need, but sometimes. So you still need some level of something, technical ability to Lego piece all these things together. Every month that waterline goes up and up and up. So now like I'm seeing non-super technical co-founders be able to output more and more technically deep MVPs without too much help. And I see technical founders being able to put out much more complex things faster. So that's a trend I'm really excited about because, in my opinion, it grows the pie. There's certainly not going to be less startups because of it. There are definitely going to be more startups because of it. There's also going to be a lot more shitty, low quality startups because of it. But there's also going to be more high quality startups because of it. So again, putting on my angel investor hat on is going to be ever more important to try to filter out the bad ones. It's like the famous thing of the difference between the Apple, the App Store, and the Google App Store. There's a lot more garbage in the Google App Store because the barrier of entry is lower. It's the same thing here. AI is lowering the barrier of entry, so there's going to be a lot more garbage. And it's going to be shiny garbage, but it's going to be garbage. But I am excited about it. And I'm seeing like founders that I know that I respect. I see them playing around with things and whipping together things in a couple of days that just a couple of years ago would have taken 3 months to do. So that's pretty cool.
Igor, my last question for you. If you could give yourself advice at the beginning of your career, what are one or two of the things you would have told yourself?
Invest in Microsoft. You know, yeah. I've had an atypical career where I feel like I've done at every turn exactly what I wanted to do. And I don't have a lot of regrets, except I could have always invested in a better thing. Like I'll give you an example. I came back from San Francisco in like 2009-ish. And for the first time, I was like, okay, because in San Francisco, I was working on like 3 different startups at the same time. And 2 of them are hilarious. And we never launched them because the lawyers basically told me I can't. But I came back to Boston and I basically said, okay, like, let's see what's out there. Maybe I'll join something super early stage. So it's not my idea specifically, but it's like something interesting. And I looked around. I basically had 2 offers on the table. One was from these 2 guys that had a recruiting company, and then they wrote some homegrown thing to manage it better. And they're like, hey, I think we can grow this a little bit more and turn this into something, but we need like a founding engineer to do it. And another one was a couple of guys that were like, we've got this thing that like sends emails as like a marketing automation thing. We need not a founding engineer, but employee number 2 or 3 or something. They had like 3 or 4 people at that point. And I'm like, I don't know anything about marketing automation and I don't know anything about staffing, but the staffing thing seemed more approachable. So I'm like, okay, let's do it. So the staffing thing turned into eRecruit, which we sold for 62 million after 8 years. But the other thing turned out to be HubSpot. So like looking back, I made some mistakes, but they're not mistakes that I feel bad about. I'm happy.
Igor, how can our audience stay connected to you?
So I'm very accessible. I'm the only Igor Belagorudsky in the world. So if you know how to spell my name, you could find me. Our website is fastcto.com, but you can find me on LinkedIn. My email is Igor, IGOR, @fastcto.com. My phone number is literally OK Ring Igor. Very easy to remember. I knew some folks that worked at Google Voice when it was in beta. Reach out if you're an investor and need some due diligence help. Reach out if you're a founder and you need some CTO help or some direction or some developers. And reach out with knowledge that I won't let you pay me for something that I don't think you should be paying me for. So it's a very low risk reach out.
Well, Igor, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for making time to join us today. And I look forward to our next conversation.